storytellers and readers. Welcome to another episode of I'll Read That, the show where your stories get heard. Whether you're an unpublished author, an independent, a self published independent, or just someone who has a really cool story that wants someone to read it, this is your space to shine. In each episode, I'll read your submitted story aloud, giving it a voice, a platform, and most importantly, you a chance to grow. You'll get feedback from fellow writers, readers, and other creatives to help sharpen your craft and take your storytelling to the next level. So, if you've been waiting for someone to say, "Yeah, I'll read that," I think you found your place. Submit your story, get heard, and let's grow together. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have something worth sharing, you know what to do. We are back in Thassodar Jax Galactic Ranger by David Jace. This is the next chapter, chapter 12. So let's get on with it. Species log. Human Jax, Earth 2010-18. There may be another sentient species living on this planet than humans. It is perhaps one of the ancient sentient species previously reported that has gone into hiding. They are undoubtedly small and seem to exist primarily for the acquisition of dental bone fragments from humans. Whether these are for consumption or for use as currency, it is not clear, as no specimen of the species has yet been observed. The species reportedly collects the discarded denticles and leaves a small amount of human currency behind in exchange. The rate of the exchange from tooth to coin seems to be highly variable. Strangely, they only appear to be interested in the first teeth of humans, not the later ones. Humans grow two sets of teeth, one after the other. Consult Human Physiology reference for more detail. Humans refer to these creatures as tooth fairies. By the time they pulled into the processing facility, Grote was awake again, but still groggy, and his left arms were still weak and sluggish. Hermes had recovered from his attack, though he still bore the mark of it, a cut beside one eye. What a disaster, Schuld exclaimed from the fifth time as he exited the cab. That settlement only had 500 humans, and the whole gig was nearly ruined by a human and a ranger. We know, Schuld. We were there. You can stop talking about it. Hermes groaned as he let himself down from the cab. He could still feel a little soreness from that kick. They caught us by surprise. It happens. We got away. He hit the button on the wall to close the big loading doors. Dorsch helped Grote out of the back of the cab. One of you guys check on the cargo, while I help Grote into the office. We need a report in. Schuld grumbled but headed to the back of the truck. He leapt to the ledge and opened the little hatch on the big doors. Inside, in the purple light of the interior, he could see hundreds of humans lying around the bottom of the truck, all unconscious from the tranquilizing gas they had turned on when they left the compound. He shut the door and flipped back to the concrete floor. They followed Dorsch and Grote into the office. A few minutes later, the fuzzy image of the boss stood behind the desk, and they recounted the events at Rock Hollow. Schuld tactfully omitted his murder of the gate guard, and Hermes didn't correct the tale. There were only 500 humans there, boss, so all in all, it was a pretty small take. I know how many humans were there. That's why it was supposed to be the first attempt. The important part is that Ranger Jax was there. The image billowed out either side and recondensed. I had him though, Bosch. Grote struggled to sit up without falling back down. I had him against Shri in my hand. He held up one of his hands in front of his face and tried to focus his vision on the fingers. And then what? A human girl shot you with your own gun? They aren't even space-worthy yet. The image was bright red and floating 3 feet above the chair. It was not evident if these traits were from the projector or from the source. He turned at the sound of Hermes' chuckle. And you, laughing boy, she beat you barehanded. Faster than the wind, and a human girl beat you with nothing more than a flashlight. Where were you, Schuld? I was tracking down the other humans, he protested. The bruise on his forehead from the thrown rock had turned an ugly shade of yellow-green. Tracking down, which means they didn't walk calmly into the truck like they were supposed to. Things didn't go as planned exactly, Dorsch interjected. We had to improvise. Didn't go as planned, eh? That sounds like quite the understatement. The image flickered lower until it almost seemed as if it were sitting in the chair. Well, this settles it. I'm coming to join you. The four exchanged glances with each other at this news. This was not part of the plan. Get started setting up the processing. Once you have the first crop in place, Groat can run the processing, while the rest of you meet me at the next target. I'm just gonna have to get my hands dirty to get the job done right. Shold waited until the projector clicked off before rolling his eyes at the dusty cliche. You guys really screwed up this time, he mumbled under his breath. We all had a piece of it. Shold, so stop throwing blame around. Ermi stood up from the couch. Let's just make sure we don't embarrass ourselves like that again. Groat, why don't you rest a bit more? We'll get things started. You look like you're still feeling the effects of the tranquilizer. The other three headed out of the office, leaving Groat on the couch. Shall we start with the truck? There are fewer there, and we'd have to unload it anyway to get the next target. Good idea, Dorsch. Shold, would you prepare the processing line while we get them unloaded? Shold hesitated a moment, never a fan of being given orders, but finally answered, Sure. Sorry you got hurt. He turned and strode away from the pair before they could respond. Hermes looked at Dorsch and shrugged. That's progress, Dorsch commented before opening the big truck doors and lifting himself up to the bed. Hermes stepped to the side to turn off the tranquilizing gas. They didn't want to get knocked out like the humans. Shold walked across the concrete floor to the extensive building, and at the corner of the office rooms, he threw a switch and lights warmed up high above, casting eerie yellow light down onto the hundreds of clear plastic tubs arranged in rows. Each tub was 6.5 feet tall and 30 inches in diameter. They stood at a 65-degree angle, with the back interior wall flattened more than the rest, to accommodate a prone subject. Beside each was a metal panel with diagnostic readouts, primarily activation and control buttons, and minor adjustment knobs. From the top of each chamber, clear tubes ran up to a network between the containers and the lights, combining into one large tube at the end. The bottom of the containers was the bottom of the containers held a network of metal tubes that ran along the ground to opposite end, which ended in a furnace. Each container was 2 steps above the floor to make room for the excess matter tubes below. Shold knew them very well, for they were his life's work. He mounted the raised platforms at the front of the container array and stood at the helm, surveying the container array in a cursory inspection. He turned on the control station, and the tiny display lit up and began running initial system checks. At one side, a holographic model of the container array materialized, each one flashing green before solidifying. Out across the array, the containers were also lighting up, filling the containers with green light. On the other side of the control panel, a holographic representation of the storage chamber appeared, outlined in yellow but empty. Shold ran his fingers across the holographic array model, licking his lips in joyous anticipation. Shold, open the chambers for us, Hermes called out from below. He and Dorsch were standing by the first few containers, carrying humans. Hermes had one on a rolling cart, and Dorsch was holding two more in his many arms. Shold triggered the front panels on the first three containers to whisper to the side, sliding around the container to open. He watched as they laid each one in separate containers. One man had revived enough to struggle weakly, still feeling the effects of the tranquilizer. The other male, though awake, was still too affected even to struggle as they put him in. The female didn't open her eyes until the front panel of her chamber cycled back around, sealing her inside. The holographic chambers were now highlighted in purple, indicating that the chambers were loaded and ready. Shold licked his lips and activated the chambers. The holographic ones turned fully purple, and the real ones filled with purple light. The first man beat upon the inside of the chamber. He kicked against the front panel. Shold was unconcerned. He knew those panels would withstand even Groat's strength. The woman's hair lifted around her shoulders, floating in the air inside the chamber. The purple light pulsed, and all three jerked against the flattened back of the chambers. It pulsed again, and they resumed their vain struggles. Their struggles were more energetic as they shook off the effects of the tranquilizer, but it was too late. Another pulse and the women screamed. Their clothing began to gently afloat as well, as though they were in free fall, but their feet were still on the bottom of the chambers. The pulses of the light increased in frequency and intensity. The screams from inside the chambers also increased. Shold's smile widened as he watched their skin glowing with small specks of multicolored light. Their screams evolved into sobs and cries, as the light on their skin intensified, covering their entire bodies. Once their body was completely converted, it pulled apart, particles floating up into the tube above, the flow of a myriad of tiny lights floating up the tubes toward the storage chamber. It was as if a galaxy of tiny stars were being sucked into a black hole. Finally, their bodies removed, their various clothing and accessories floated to the floor of the chamber. leaving a small sphere of bright, twisting light that changed colors every few seconds, convulsing in rhythm with the chamber's pulsing purple light. The little spheres of twisting light exploded within the chamber. The reaction caused a ripple of energy to pulse outward, but it was absorbed by the chamber as it touched the walls. The twisting, colorful life energy flowed up into the tubes as well, joining the little stars and poured into the storage chamber. Shoal took his eyes off the chamber long enough to glance at his readouts and controls. The storage chamber hologram now showed a sliver of material, which indicated that the level of energy it was holding. The three model processing chambers now glowed red. The floors of each opened, dropping the clothing and property into the lower channels, where it was pushed down to the furnace to be processed into a more accessible local fuel. As the floor panels resealed, the model chambers turned green again, ready for the next load. Joel's eyes glittered. Complete success, gentlemen. Bring the rest in, he called from the helm. Dorsch was sitting on the cart, and Hermes raced it back to the truck. Dorsch brought a groggy human out, laid them on the cart, and Hermes raced them back to the next chamber as fast as wind. He loaded them into the chamber, hit the door button, and raced back to the truck. As each chamber was loaded, Shold activated, and the process was repeated. One by one, humans filled the chambers, and one by one, they were transformed into energy and stored. There was no trace, no bodies, no evidence left behind, and nothing but pure, untraceable energy to keep. He lovingly watched over his creation. Once the entire array was fully running, Dorsch and Hermes loaded the rest of the humans into the cooler and dosed them with tranquilizer again, waiting their turn to be processed. Groot, wake up! Hermes stood beside the couch, shaking him by the shoulder. What do you want? We have to go meet the boss. Are you ready to take over the processing? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. He sat up and stretched all four arms wide. Yeah, I'm good. Go ahead. Hermes nodded and headed for the door. Hey, Hermes, Groot said. Thanks for letting me sleep it off. Don't mention it. Hermes left the room and Groot pulled himself to his feet and headed for the processing array. And that was the end of chapter 12. Wow, actually, it was a short chapter, but I think I really thoroughly enjoyed everything about it. Um, Again, I'm not going to nitpick at grammar or sentence structure or any of that stuff. I'm more about story development. Um, I did, and it could be my reading. I apologize, but I did get kind of lost in the description of how this contraption is put together. It could, like I said, maybe be painted in a more broad stroke to allow the reader to kind of fill in some of the blanks, just because the overarching detail kind of gets muddled. At least in my interpretation of it, it kind of joins together. Um, and I get kind of lost in the words. Not to say it's not good writing, I'm just saying for clarity, there's a bit of whimsy that can be added to it. But other than that, I like the pace. I'm very concerned. Again, this is just me overthinking. This is the way my brain works. With this truck, and I'm not going to do the Google math right now. That's not really what I'm here for. But 500 humans in this truck, even a 40-foot semi truck, I don't think could comfortably house 500 humans unless maybe they were stacked. I could be wrong. Someone can correct me, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But in the previous, earlier in the book, there was I think like 1,400 or 1,100 humans in the movie theater. Same kind of situation. One truck. This must be a massive truck, or there has to be some kind of alien technology going on here that is, you know, Doctor Whoing this thing to the point of just massive size. So a little more clarification on that, just because that's the way my brain works. But I digress. If you have a story that's just waiting to be read, I want to read it. So please send me your unpublished, your self-published, your independent works, your poems, your novels, your short stories to the email address in the description below, and you might be the next featured author in an episode of I'll Read That. Help me build this community where we as writers are supporting other writers and everybody's story has an opportunity to be heard. Don't forget, doesn't cost you anything. Like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your critiques, your loves, your hates, your general understandings could really help other writers grow. Not necessarily this writer specifically. Anybody who's reading your comment could use that information to help further the development of their story. So, as always, from my heart to you, please keep writing and remember, I'll read that.
I'll read that, a story to be told, unpublished words, brave and bold, chapter by chapter.